Welcome to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I'm your host, Susie St. Angelo, and thanks for being here. Today, my guest is Shanah Bell, a holistic health practitioner with a Master of Nutrition degree from North Carolina State and a double board certified in holistic nutrition. She helps not only individuals, but animals. She was diagnosed at a young age with celiac disease and has been instrumental in helping a number of people with a number of different issues, including celiac. I think you'll find our conversation very interesting and informative. And if you are one who is suffering through issues and you're not getting the results you are from your medical professional, I encourage you to listen in. You might find one or two tips that will help you along your journey. This podcast is for you if you know you need to change something, whether it's your health or your career or some other aspect of your life, and you don't think at this stage or age you can do that. I understand. Or maybe you just don't know how to make a change. Or perhaps you're someone who's caught in analysis paralysis. I see you. I understand. I used to be the same way. I know that just listen in and you might get something out of today's podcast episode. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, Apple, or Amazon Podcasts. And now let's get into today's episode and meet my guest, Shanah Bell. Hi, Shanah.
Hi, Susie.
How are you
Good
today?
To see you again. I'm good. Can't complain.
Well, thank you for being on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I enjoyed meeting you virtually a few weeks ago and was excited to hear about your background and what you do for people. And I believe that it's really timely and important now that we share what's available to listeners and viewers on their health. So tell me a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you got into what you're doing.
So my background in health and wellness and nutrition really started back in 1986. So I guess it's been going on for a little while. When I was a child and I was very sick and nobody could figure out what's going on with me. My parents had already lost my older brother to neuroblastoma right before he turned 4. And at this point, I think according to my parents, I started getting sick around the age of later 5, early 6. And nobody could figure out what's going on. Different doctors diagnosed me with different things, including cystic fibrosis and leukemia. And I think one other rare brain disease that my mom mentioned, that none of those were it, luckily for me. Come to find out I had celiac disease. And at the time I was very lucky to live in Southern California where we lived, because there happened to be a set of gastroenterologists in LA that knew what that was. So they figured they had the solution. So lucky for me, I got diagnosed with celiac. And that's when I learned what gluten was then, which was well before what most people had ever heard of gluten. Celiac actually didn't get recognized as a disease until 1990. So I got diagnosed years before it was even recognized widely as a disease. So I learned at that point, along with my parents, that I basically had to cut out everything that contains gluten, including all of the fun derivatives. So at that time, the internet wasn't really a thing. And they printed out all these pieces of paper and said, here are all the things that gluten can be masked in. Memorize them, because you have to figure out what they're in. So from then on, I've been gluten-free. Although I didn't tell people that's what the issue was, because nobody knew what it was. So I just said I couldn't eat certain foods. But that brought me back from the brink of death, which was great. My parents were thrilled it wasn't another cancer. So they were happy with it. I mean, not happy, but given the options. they'll take that one all day. So food has just been a huge part of my life since then. And, during the late 80s and 90s, I started digging more into, just health and nutrition and food because it was so important to me. And at that point, I was doing the, searching through libraries thing, and devoured any information I could get to help keep myself well. And so then that information started kind of, transferring to other people because people usually would come to me like, oh, Shanna knows all this stuff about food and nutrition. So let's ask her because she knows stuff that we don't. And it just kind of stemmed from there. And I eventually went to college, and my plan was to be pre-med because I wanted to be either a gastroenterologist to help figure out how to get rid of celiac, or a neonatologist. Seems very different, I'm sure, but I always had a thing for neonatology. So I started college and was taking all the classes for pre-med and realized that I hated it. So it didn't align with me to that. Up to that point, I am more holistic. I am preventative. I like to get to the root cause of things. And what I found at that point is that our current medical system, unfortunately for everyone going into it, whether they know it or not, is mostly it's reactive. It's, surgeries and pharmaceuticals, and it doesn't do anything about the root cause. And it just didn't align with me. So I switched majors, floundered around for a while, like a person in their early 20s does sometimes. And eventually I ended up going back to school to get my master's degree when I was a single parent years later. I have 2 kids. And I got my master's in nutrition because I wanted to learn more on a cellular level about how everything operates together. Like I had gained a lot of information just, reading throughout the years, but I really needed to know how things operate because I like puzzles and I like to know how all the pieces go together. So I went to NC State and did my master's in human nutrition. Incidentally, they focus a lot more in that school on agriculture and food science. So I had to do my internship with animals, which worked out well because I had contracted for the Science Museum here in Raleigh for years. So I worked with their living collections and helped them figure out some root cause issues with specific species that have been coming in with the same issues for years, and ultimately helped resolve them with food. I just changed the diets, and they said this is great. And for me, that was a really cool challenge because these species were so different than humans. So I actually work with humans and animals. And years ago when I was in high school, I had shadowed a vet because I was interested in that, and I've worked with animals since I was younger. So I've kind of always had a love for them as well. So since then, I started my own business, and I work with humans and animals, helping try to figure out the root cause and or how to help the body reach the level of homeostasis it wants to reach, which is the level of balance, so that the body can naturally do what it needs to do to heal. And I typically am doing that through lifestyle medicine practices because I'm board certified in lifestyle medicine as well as holistic nutrition. So that's typically through nutrition, physical exercise, or physical activity, excuse me. Exercise is a component of physical activity. Like this to me is just physical activity because I do this all the time, so it's like breathing, but it might be considered exercise for other people. Sleep, social emotional connections, stress, and reduction of toxic substances. Now with humans, I'm usually looking at all those components. With animals, not all 6, but definitely food, and a lot of times physical activity. And then sometimes social emotional connections because animals get, sad and stressed out also, just like we do.
So we both have something in common. I'm not celiac, but I am gluten sensitive. Not obviously not to the degree that you were, but certainly discomfort. Lots going on there. Once I eliminated it, a lot of things changed, but there were some other factors. And then We both have been trained through II and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition as health coaches to help people with their lifestyle changes and mindset shifts. And truthfully, I'm a firm believer that our health is made up of not just our diet and exercise, but all these other factors: our home life, our finances, our careers, our 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 activities, the things that we find joy. So it's really important that we're having this conversation because I think people view their health in sometimes one container, that it's only this traditional medicine. And I was so excited to have you on because I think it's good for people to know that there are alternatives out there, and there's ways, if you're frustrated with your health, um, and you're going down one route, there's other routes to go down, and you might find there's some other things you can do besides going down the traditional route.
I completely agree. I've pretty much always thought a little outside the box, gone off the beaten path, the road less traveled, if you will, but I have found that works really well for me. I was also taught as a child to question everything, and as we do with our kids, but I've never stopped. So I do want to question everything. I don't know everything. I don't have any answers. Nobody does. So I try to look at, people as individual, individual, unique beings that are, we're very dynamic, but what works for one person may not work for somebody else. So you ask the questions. Just because I've helped somebody specifically with this one specific thing doesn't mean that the protocol that we implemented for them will work for you, because you're a different person. You have a different life. So you have to advocate for yourself and keep asking questions until you find answers that resonate with you. That's how I kind of look at everything. There's not a one size fits all.
I remember Shanah going through. I was actually having a massage, and my masseuse looked really great. I said, "What are you doing? You look fantastic." And she told me about functional medicine. And she said the name of the person she worked with. And I said, "Oh my gosh, she was one of my former clients in the corporate world." And so I made an appointment to go see her. She was in integrative functional medicine, which I knew hardly anything about, but I've since then become educated. And she was really my lifesaver, and did the deeper dive with the tests, and came back and told me some things that I would never have known had I stayed the course. And so I cried. I literally was so overcome because finally I felt like I had gotten an answer to something that I didn't. And I'm guessing that you're seeing people who are probably at wit's end, who just don't know what to do anymore. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but I want to get your feel for who's coming in your door, who's knocking on your door to see you.
No, that is correct. If we're not going to get into the trans theoretical model of change, but if we take a brief aside, I typically do not have clients that are in pre-contemplation or contemplation phase. I have clients come to me when they've tried everything else and they've already been in an action phase with other people trying to really figure out what's going on, but nothing has worked. So they come to me because they sometimes have multiple labs from different doctors and everyone says they're fine. But they know they're not because they don't feel fine, and they're struggling all the time. Or they could have multiple diagnoses and they're just told that this is just how it's going to be. There is no cure. You're just going to be on these meds for the rest of your life, and it's just going to get progressively worse, and that's pretty much it. And I'm sorry for you. And they want to know if there's anything they can do themselves to help reduce or eliminate some of the symptoms or some of the things that are going on and get back to more of a normal. And so that's usually where I come in. So people don't come to me if they're just kind of thinking about making a change. I'm not your person. Usually they're going to go mainstream first, which is unfortunate because in a lot of cases, I could have saved people a lot of time and energy, money, and pain, because I'm trying to get to the root cause, which is also what, functional and holistic is all about, and in some cases integrative as well. We're not just trying to, now first of all, let me say, I cannot treat like a physician. I'm not a physician. I cannot treat. But those of us in these genres do not, treat symptoms. We are trying to get to the root cause so that the body can then basically right the ship and get back to a level of balance like it needs to. Because ultimately, everything that's alive on this earth wants to stay alive. We all want to live. So the body's going to fight tooth and nail to try and get back to that place of balance. If you give it the right tools and figure out what's going on, in most cases, it can do that. So it's just a matter of figuring out what's going on underneath and not just throwing things at the symptoms. The symptoms are usually a cause of something else. So just fixing the symptoms doesn't solve the problem. You're just masking it.
Right. So when someone reaches out to you, they're probably sharing a lot of information with you, and I imagine it's either they're being very vulnerable with you about their situation, or relaying scientific information from a medical professional. And so do you have a niche? Do you have someone you're ideally looking for as a client?
People keep telling me I should have one. But people have been telling me my whole life I should do things differently. I don't. And the thing is, it's really anybody that is having a hard time with, I get people all the time with hormonal imbalances. And their, gastroenterologist or their gynecologists are telling them everything's fine, but they know stuff they know it's not. Or thyroid. I get a lot of GI, probably because I have celiac, so that's one of my main areas of focus. I love a good GI test. I like to dig into the gut microbiome, and I've been doing that for a long time. So I'm really glad that that's becoming a little more prominent. I've had tons of kidney disease and tons of type 2 diabetes. Not only with humans, but with animals. So much that it kind of blows my mind. Epilepsy, I've had Lyme quite a few times. Alzheimer's and dementia, that's a whole different topic. But there are some things that can potentially help depending on the situation and the progression level. So it's kind of all over the place. It's really just anybody who wants to see if there's anything they can do for themselves to help alleviate, some of the stuff that's going on and have more of a, normal life, whatever that means to them.
Do your clients have those aha moments like I did, who cry and are emotional because finally they've found someone that can relate to what they're going through and can find that root cause?
Yeah, I do get that a lot. It's not only that, but usually a lot of anger and frustration, because at that point, they say, how come they didn't just see that these tests were not normal? So this is something I want to say to people if they don't know. So the way lab testing is done in the United States, I use a functional medicine chart, which still can be varied depending on the functional medicine physician that you're talking to. But labs in the United States, so if you get them done at the bigger companies like, let's say, LabCorp or Quest, I'm just going to use those two. There are more, but let's just use those. LabCorp has their own set of lab values ranges, and so does Quest. And they sometimes align pretty closely, but maybe not all the time. And it is based solely on the current information they have about what the average American, what their ranges are for those levels. So for me, the average American, unfortunately, is sick. Most of them are overweight. Let me rephrase. The majority of us are overweight, well more than 50%. There's a high percentage of obesity, and I think the last stat I heard is that the majority of Americans have at least one chronic disease. Most have 2 or more, and most Americans are on at least 3 different prescription medications. So for me, I don't want to fall into the standard range because that means to me I'm already sick. So if you're in the standard range and the physician's looking at it, what they're saying is you are an average American. So the question you have to ask yourself is that where you want to be? And if it is, great. I'm probably not the person for you. if 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 it's not, and you want to actually try and figure out what's going on, then I can potentially help. But it's not, it's not just that as well. When it comes to food, sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes you'll get a physician that will ask, about your diet or exercise. They don't have a whole lot of time, unfortunately, and that's a product of a broken system and not their fault. I do not blame physicians at all. They go into it with good intentions. That's why burnout is so high with physicians, and I feel really bad for them because it is not a system that's set up for them to actually do what they went to school for. But, they may ask you about nutrition, but in most medical schools, they don't teach nutrition at all. You may get one class when you're a freshman, that's like 4 hours, and that's it. So that's not really their arena, just like my arena is not surgery. So I wouldn't tell you what you needed to do for surgery. That's outside my scope. That is definitely somebody else. And it's so, if they tell you that you're eating fine or it sounds great, in most cases that's probably not true because they just don't know what they don't know. And it's not fair for us to expect them to know that. They're already being pulled 50 million directions as it is and work horrendous hours and are fighting with insurance companies with billing to get paid. So it's not really fair to expect them to also know all of this other stuff that's outside their scope. They are human. They simply can't. So I don't blame them, just as a side.
I agree with that. I agree with everything you've said. And I also will take it one step further that, that's where we come in helping people to fill that gap of what doctors are limited in and how we can support doctors or medical professionals or nurse practitioners and functional medicine practices to help make those lifestyle changes and whether it's food, exercise, changing your relationship. That was one of mine I needed to do is to change a major relationship in my life. But, I think that my eyes are wide open to, there's much more to this than just one or two things. So, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you, and I'm excited about this. I wouldn't say industry, but this whole change in the medical professional field is that we're seeing, more talk about the gut biome. We're talking more about functional medicine. We're talking more about celiac and gluten and things that are, wheat that's mass produced. And I think the majority of people have something going on. They just either decide they don't want to deal with it or they, can't afford to deal with it.
Or they think it's normal.
Or they think it's normal.
I've heard that a lot. Like, oh, well, isn't this just normally how you're supposed to feel?
Yeah. And I'll add menopause too for the women who are listening that they have toughed it out for so many years that the symptoms they think are just what you go through because we didn't have role models to tell us you don't have to accept that. And we're talking more about menopause and some things that we can do for ourselves to make us feel better.
Yeah, which I love that conversation has become more mainstream, and there, are a lot of, highly educated people in that specific topic and arena talking about it. There are of course different sides, and it depends on who you talk to, but it still goes back to being bio-individual and figuring out what works best for you because we're not all the same. And there are so many different tools in the toolbox for menopause that, sometimes what works for one person doesn't work for another.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Totally agree with that. When we met, I was, and you mentioned working with animals. I told you a story about my cousin and his wife and how they became more holistic as a result of going to a naturopath for their dog, and their dog was having major food issues, and by eating, the mass-produced dog foods out there, and so that's how they became aware of it. And then they themselves made changes. And then we found out we had this in common. And so it's really interesting how a pet, kind of in a way became our connection even all these years later. So I'm just really excited when I meet someone who's on that path too. And so I kind of wanted to ask you to speak to our pets, and working with animals too. So tell me a little bit more about what that's like to work with animals.
I actually really like working with animals. Um, I hate to say that in most cases I prefer working with the animals than the humans. Um, but a big part of it is because I've always felt close to animals. And even though they don't speak our language, um, I've I've kind of always been able to take their social cues and understand kind of what they need, or what they're telling me, which is probably why I started doing some behavioral training as well, because I find that enjoyable. Just to see the changes fairly quickly. And I the on the other side of that, dogs will kind of do whatever I we want them to for the most part, because if it's a good relationship with the animal, they know that it's a symbiotic relationship. That's kind of how our relationship evolved with wolves and dogs. Is that you know they would protect us and we would feed them, so it works out well. Well, it's not any different now. They want to make us happy and they want to protect us. Hence, sometimes the incessant barking, depending on the breed, which is unnecessary from the UPS or the FedEx guy. But it's a thing. And, we try to keep them healthy and give them shelter and give them food and things like that. So it's a symbiotic relationship. So we as humans do a lot of things for our animals that we don't do for ourselves. So I found that working with animals a lot of times is more satisfying for me, because humans will do anything for their animals. So if I tell them what I'm looking at, what's going on, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Here's the list of the foods you should be incorporating, that we should shift to. Here are the reasons why, based on the things going on with your dog. And I spend a lot of time in PubMed. I probably spend more time in PubMed than most people spend in the restroom. I'm in PubMed a lot. So, PubMed is the site where all the scientific journals post their clinical trials, data, studies, meta-analysis, and so you can go there and type in keywords to search for what you're looking for, and find multiple results, and then it will take you to the direct publication, so that you can get the full study. So I have alerts for specific topics that get sent to my email every day. So I'm in PubMed a lot. So if I'm looking for specific things, like, let's say, epilepsy in a dog, I'm going to go in PubMed and see what information I can find. But I'm also looking at clinical data from other countries as well, which sometimes is not in PubMed. It just depends. But the publication is important to make sure it's actually peer-reviewed, and not just something somebody put out there, because I could do that. Anyway, so I will give them all of that information, and then they really want their animal to be healthy. So they will then implement the changes, and usually we'll follow up and kind of see how it's going. And if for some reason the animal isn't responding at first, or doesn't like some of the foods we suggested, then I'll come up with some other options, and we'll keep trying it that way. But they will do everything they can for their animal. But then when it's a human, and this is where the health and wellness coaching piece comes in, because with a human, we have a tendency to in most cases, come up with a million and one excuses as to why we cannot implement these changes that we said we wanted. Um, so the health and wellness coaching piece comes in to help facilitate the intrinsic motivation and the behavioral change that clients tell me they want. But with humans, that's harder. It's an extra component. With dogs, I don't have to do that. You just give it to them, and they say, "Okay, I'll eat it."
Yeah. I find that really fascinating, and then I want to go back to my cousin's situation, and I wonder, do you have situations where you have worked with an animal and the human says, "Wow, this is incredible. Can you help me?"
I have, yeah. I've had some clients that are humans and animals in the same house.
Okay,
Yes, I have.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So a few months ago, I met face to face with a clinician who has two offices in Indiana, and she helps young teens and adult women with eating disorders, and does a lot of psychological work with that. But she said a lot of times with the young teens, it's hard to get them to change because the parents don't want to change. And I thought that that was really kind of interesting how they want them to either stay in that world, or the parents don't think they themselves can change, and therefore don't want their child to. It's a little scary. So
It is. I have the opposite, actually. We have 5 kids. So I love my kids, but I want them to continue. I want them to continue to change and evolve. And I am always trying to evolve. So I want them to also voice to me if they feel like I'm not evolving a certain way or communicating a way they understand. Because as teenagers, it's really hard. It's really hard as a parent to communicate with a teenager. Um, and one of my teenagers has autism, so she's always had food issues. And I want her to change. I've wanted her to change from day one when everyone said, "Oh, she'll get over the food thing." She's almost 17 and has not gotten over the food thing. So I can throw information at her all of the time, you know, actual studies. Hey, here's some things that have been shown to work with, autism to help maybe reduce some of the symptoms. And she'll just glare at me or side eye me. But if somebody else who's not me tells her the same thing, she will listen. So I need somebody else to tell her.
so yeah, I think that's a very interesting avenue. That it's obviously not my wheelhouse to delve into that subject of eating disorders and the psychology. That's above my pay grade. Um, eh, yeah, and I think we tend to want to be helpful in areas that we know a lot about and we have personal experiences with, as you have had, and as you've evolved. Thank goodness back in 1986 that there was enough of a deep dive to know what you had and that there was hope for you. So I think you also provide hope, that there can be a better uh, evolution of people with some changes, and seeing things differently, seeing test and lab work differently. And that's where I feel like functional medicine is a real strength. I think that they take that deeper dive. Um,
They also have more time to do so because of how they're set up, which is helpful. And that's the catch 22 with cash pay versus insurance is unfortunately a lot of people have a hard time in their head wrapping their brain around cash pay, or concierge medicine, some people call it, as opposed to insurance. Um, but if you're not getting any value out of the insurance, um, then in my point of view, what's the point? I mean,
Well, I also think you've got to feel some pain to make some changes. It's in my banking world. We always wanted people to have some skin in the game, or they wouldn't make some changes. And I think that's true of being in that kind of functional medicine area, especially if you don't have insurance or have an HSA or a flex spending account or whatever to use, that I've got some skin in the game. I want this to work equally as well as they want it to work. But I keep praising my medical professional because I think they're progressive. And I was doing a list of wellness trends for this year at the end of last year, and I was like, my medical professional is doing that. They have a sauna. We've talked about that. They have a kitchen to teach cooking classes to kids and adults, and they have other classes. They have an aesthetic wing now that, I mean, they're just really progressive, and I really like that. I like that they're looking ahead and being proactive instead of reactive.
I do too. Yeah, I think if I could find someone around here that was that proactive, um, that would be phenomenal. So far, I have not. Um, I have found quite a few people in the integrative holistic functional space near us, but well, quite a few. Some, but unfortunately, the majority of them are just pushing supplement lines that they sell, and that's the downside because it kind of gives the practice a bad name, and that's not really what it should be about. So I love that yours is actually looking at, it looks like they're looking at the clinical data of what's, the new information that's coming out and trying to use all the modalities possible to help the body heal itself. And that's phenomenal.
It is. It is. It's just really impressive. Um, so I want to ask you, what's your SOS? What's one or two things someone who's listening to this conversation can do to move the needle forward? I know they can reach out to you. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what would be your advice to someone listening to this podcast?
I think I have three big pieces of advice. I think the first one is to incorporate more plants into your diet. It doesn't have to mean that you're completely whole foods plant-based or become vegetarian or become vegan. Just at least, one meal a day or once a day, try to incorporate more plants, do a swap for something else you would normally eat and add more plants to it. Whether it's, greens or tomatoes or nuts or seeds or, rice or beans, preferably whole grain. Just try to add more plants to your life because the majority of the population now eats about, this is according to lifestyle medicine, eats about 20% plants and about 80% other stuff, meat, ultra processed foods, dairy, eggs, everything else. And so we're trying to flip that and get people to eat closer to 80% plants. So even just a little bit, just add in more plants to your diet. That could even be spices. Add some spices in. Those are great. I put spices in my coffee. My coffee is organic soy milk, cinnamon, and turmeric. That's what's in it. No sugar. That's what I put in there. But I also drink 2 different cups of tea before I ever have coffee. Herbal tea. So I get a lot of different things from the spice realm. So I like cinnamon and turmeric. They're very, they have a lot of healing components, which are great, especially for joint pain, which a lot of people have. So I like those. So that's my first tip. Incorporate more plants, even just a little bit. Anything is better than nothing. Just a swap. The other thing is to try and incorporate a little bit more physical activity in your day. Most people sit too much at desks. This is one of the reasons I have a walking pad under my standing desk. I have a chair for my desk. I've never used it. I can, but I just prefer it this way. And most people sit at desks. So even if you can just get up once an hour and walk around for 5 minutes, anything helps. So any amount of movement, if you could increase that just a little bit, that would be great. Moving throughout the day also helps increase your neural synapses, so your brain works better. So I'm sure your boss would like that if you're at work. He might be more productive. You never know. And then the other thing is that make a small change. Just start with one small change. And don't try to bite off more than you can chew. A lot of people, especially, I'm kind of glad January's over because a lot of people in January are like, you know, they get onto this bandwagon like, I'm going to do all these things all at once. And the reason that it doesn't work is because they try to do too many things all at once, and it's just not sustainable. It's too many things. So just start with one. The 2 pieces of advice I gave before. Okay, let's just say this week you want to try and incorporate more physical activity. Okay, do that. And then maybe the next week try adding more plants. You don't have to do it all at once. Just one small thing at a time.
That's been my wisdom since I became a health coach and since I started a podcast. It's the small steps that lead to big changes. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming and it doesn't have to be major. And I think your advice is spot on and common sense. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. Are there any other spices besides turmeric and cinnamon you would recommend?
I mean, we use a lot of spices all the time. So, um, I mean, it depends on. So, spices all have different medicinal components. So, it depends on what you're trying to use them for, in all reality. Um, I just like cinnamon. I use Ceylon cinnamon, which is different than the majority of the cinnamon you get, which is cassia. Um, it has different effects, and it is less toxic to the liver, whereas cassia is not. It's not toxic. Let me rephrase. It has. You can have higher amounts of Ceylon cinnamon than you can of cassia. So, I'm usually putting a teaspoon of cinnamon and turmeric in my big coffee mug. So you don't necessarily want to have that much cassia cinnamon at one time, because if you have issues going on with your liver, it can overload it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we didn't talk about today?
I mean, I I think what we've covered has been pretty good. Good, a good overview, some good, first steps for people to take. Advocate for yourself. Really, that's kind of my biggest message is nobody's you. Nobody knows how you feel or how you felt. The biggest advocate you're gonna have for yourself is you. So if something doesn't feel right, so you're the one who's gonna have to ask all the questions and try and get to the bottom of it.
I tend to take notes on my phone when I'm with my medical professional, so that I have history going back. And years ago, I had a dictaphone, and I had recorded conversations with my physician, because you might get stuck on one thing they mention and miss some of the other stuff that comes after it. But I do believe taking notes and reviewing them, and um, you know, being able to go back and see the progression of things, especially as you advocate for yourself.
So I use a HIPAA compliant platform for my clients called Healthy, and I can not only have the conversations like we're having in there and record them, but I can do charting notes at the same time. And they can also take notes, and then I can upload the charting notes directly to their profile so they can look at it, and then they can track their changes in their weight, food, labs, anything else. So it's a good kind of one-stop shop for them to put everything in there, which is great.
Yeah, that is great. That's good to know. Um, so, Shannon, where can people find you?
I'm on Plantrition. Um, so if you're looking for a more plant-based or plant-forward um, healthcare professional, Plantrition is the place to go. One of the places. So I'm on there. You can just look me up under my name, Shanah Bell. Uh, so I'm there. I'm on Healthy, so you can find me on Healthy. I'm also on ACLM, which is the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So I'm one of the practitioners listed there. Uh, and then you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook under Adaptive Nourishment or Shanah Bell. I think I have both of them listed. um, those are probably the main places.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I Our paths are going to cross again, but I'm so excited to have this conversation and know that what works for some might not work for others, and there's alternatives out there, and you're a great example of alternatives that can make lasting changes in people's lifestyle and health.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and I really enjoyed this conversation with you, just like our previous conversation. I think what you're doing is also phenomenal, and I love that you've put this podcast together and that you bring on a wide variety of guests that, have an overarching same goal to help others get to whatever it is they're wanting. So I like that.
Well, and I hope that, people listening, if it touches one person, two people, and they can make some changes, then I feel like my work is done. you know?
Me too. A drop in the pond.
That's right.
A drop in the pond.
Well, thanks so much, and I know we'll be in touch soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Susie.
Well, friends, sadly, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for listening to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. And thank you, Shanah, for being my guest today. It was such a powerful time to talk about functional medicine and nutrition and gut biome. And what I loved about this episode was advocating for ourselves and the importance of it, as well as Shannah's 3 tips on small things we can do to make a big difference. So just a quick reminder on how you can support this podcast. You can like, share, and subscribe. If you have a question or you want to give me a review, I'm happy to take that. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can certainly join my email newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter. If you just send me your email address, I'm happy to add you. And if you're interested in finding out more about coaching and breath work, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon.